So there we go. Well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everybody. Welcome to our CSW 66 side event. My name is Juliet Coleman, and I'm the Director of SecurityWomen. Our speakers today, Winnie and Ellie, are both in East Africa, and I will introduce them in due course. Well, actually, Ellie is not in East Africa, but that's where she's usually based, but she's working in Palestine at the moment, but we'll come to that later. We're going to focus on their part of the world and look at the migratory journey, which is happening as a result of climate change and conflict, and often climate-induced conflict. We are also looking at security in refugee and IDP camps in Kenya and South Sudan. Other countries in the area, such as Uganda and the DRC, also have huge numbers of displaced people, and often the borders are very porous with people going backwards and forwards. But we'll hear more about that from our experts. However, I want to start with Ukraine, because I'm deeply concerned about the war in Ukraine and the impact on people's lives. And as many people, I feel a sense of dismay and anger at the unnecessary suffering and the injustice of it all. And we have to salute the courage of all people living in conflict and living in war zones, which in so many parts of the world are destroying lives. The brutality and the devastation they bring about have profound and lasting effects on everyone, and particularly children. So we think about Ukraine and all those suffering people today. But in our event, we have chosen to focus on the ways in which the climate crisis and conflict and gender inequality are conflated and mutually reinforcing, and also impact on the gains made on gender equality and the empowerment of women. We look at women's vulnerability, but also the opportunities for women to provide a better security for everyone in their communities. Conflict countries, whether arising from climate change or not, hemorrhage refugees and displaced people. The violence and lack of security experienced is different for women and boys and girls and men. And failure to deal with cases of abuse, lack of accountability in punishing perpetrators, and inadequate rule of law perpetrate the use of violence, which in turn leads to further displacement and the seeking of sanctuary. Refugee and IDP settlements may be intended as temporary, but in reality, they become near permanent. And here, culturally ingrained gender-based violence continues, and lack of security upholds a precarious existence. The practicalities of running a refugee IDP camp require a gendered approach to ensure the safety and security of all its inhabitants. Often there is a preponderance of women and children where the adult men are absent due to fighting or they've been killed in conflict, and the security in the camps is often totally male. SecurityWomen, which is an advocacy and research-based organisation, seeks to change this. We're now going to look at some images of the circumstances of displaced people, and we're looking particularly in East Africa, which is the focus of our two speakers. So let me just share my screen with you. Okay. So this photograph, I think, shows the refugee journey, grabbing a few things and walking miles. Let's get my notes on this. This is actually in Kenya. And so my first sort of, I've got 14 slides altogether, and the first 7 are of Kenya, and the next ones are of South Sudan. So this is another, so it's got a UNHCR bit of canvas there, but moving their stuff. And here you see a woman with a child, and in the background you can see the sort of rough tents. This is in the Dadaab refugee camp, which is one of the largest in the world. And Ellie will tell us more about that, I'm sure. And of course, it's very near the equator. So you have camels, and they are, look at all those water bottles being held on the camels. Again, a picture of the sometimes rough shelters. This is a picture which shows very many different forms. And this picture captures a woman who's not only she got her water bottle there, which is sort of strung on her head, but she's holding a baby in a sling. She's also trying to keep her little child going in the right direction. It's an interesting picture. And that just sums up the bleakness of some of the refugee camps. This is in South Sudan. And as you can see, there's a different sort of camp. You can see some tents in the background. And this is a refugee camp with, you can see the tents are supplied by UNHCR. And this is, you can see UN peacekeepers. This is UNMISS. And they're sort of checking the border, seeing who's going in and out. Talked about how porous the borders were, but it's trying to keep control of things. There's a picture of a woman cooking some traditional food, surrounded by children. And women in these places could spend hours collecting water. And imagine how heavy it must be. And this is only a young girl. How heavy it must be for her to carry. And how vulnerable she is. That's the other thing that strikes me. Sorry, I'm having difficulty moving on. Here we go. Some more women carrying bottles and washing and goodness knows what, and children. This is the last slide, which shows a bit of security, the barbed wire. This was actually a visit by the head of the peacekeeping mission in South Sudan in 2019. Had been a signing of the peace deal in 2018, and he was visiting. But a lot of people after that, about 600,000 people went back to their homes. But then they suffered terrible floods, devastating floods, and crops were damaged, and homes damaged, and even the boreholes were contaminated. So climate change really does impact. Okay, so I'm now going to introduce our speakers. And we've lost one of them, I think. Winnie has disappeared. Never mind, I'm sure she's going to come back. Ellie is Ellie Bird Lenawarungu, has for over 30 years served as a police officer in the UK. She has, sorry, I don't know how to put this. She was the first female officer to attain the ranks of superintendent, chief superintendent, and area commander. I mean, isn't that just fabulous? So well done, Ellie. And between 2010 and 2014, Ellie served as commander for Scotland. Oh, Winnie's coming back in. And established credibility in tackling sectarianism. And she was head of transport security for the Commonwealth Games. So Ellie has left the UK police force. In effect, she's retired from that, but she hasn't been quietly sitting with her feet up. She has delivered consultancy services in Rwanda, Uganda, Egypt, and Kenya, advising on sexual and gender-based violence, protection of women and children in refugee settlements, and the role of women in peace support, not police, peace, supporting peace. She's recently taken a senior advisory role with the British support team in Palestine, which is where she is now. So that is Ellie, and I'll just quickly talk about Winnie as well. Winnie is a gender and security specialist for the Rwanda Social Security Board and is a private researcher. Her expertise covers a broad range of gender and security issues. She's served in the Rwanda National Police for very many years and is helping private security companies with their equality issues, which are related to recruitment and the prevention of gender-based violence and sexual harassment at work. Winnie was privileged to serve as a UN police peacekeeper in South Sudan in the UNMISS mission, and she worked as a gender and child protection officer. I just got to admit somebody else in. And Winnie holds a master's degree in gender and development studies from the University of Rwanda and a law degree also from University in Kigali. So welcome to both of you. And I'm going to pass over to my colleague, Barbara Cleary now, who is the chair of SecurityWomen. Thank you, Barbara.
I am unmuted. Thank you, Juliet. Can everybody hear me okay? Good. Okay, so we're going to have a conversation between us, and we're going to open up the floor to questions later on. So please, if you have questions, and we desperately want your questions, because we want you to all be part of our conversation, if you could put them into the chat box or the question box, or raise your hand when we get to the questions in terms of our all being involved in the conversation. So let's start off with Ellie. And 30 years in the policing is a very long time, and I know from my conversations with you it was a very rewarding time as well. And now you've spent 7 years working in a very different environment. So perhaps you can spend a little bit of time telling us about your experience and what were the key issues that you've learned from your policing time and your time you're doing now in terms of your work now.
Yes, thank you. And yeah, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody. So as Juliet has said, I'm joining you today from Ramallah in Palestine, but normally home for me now for the last sort of 5-6 years has been Kenya. Juliet, I don't know, do you want me, can I share my screen, or do you want to put the slides up? Sorry, you're muted.
That's so complicated sometimes. I shall allow you to share your screen, Ellie.
Okay. So, yeah, so I mean, a real sort of transformation, transition for me since retirement. But let me just get back to the start. But really just wanted to start off with and just sort of say that whilst an immensely rewarding career over sort of more than 30 years, actually what I say to people is that some of my most informative of my full career has actually been those since retirement. So I was delighted to have this opportunity of just sharing some with you today and really picking up on sort of Barbara's sort of opening question. So this is Kakuma refugee camp in Kenya. So Juliet's already made reference to the DAB, which is the largest, and then here we have Kakuma. So literally, what you can see here is the route coming in, and you can see the expanse of white sort of tents that we would see as sort of typically reflect a settlement camp. And then also on the left here, what we have is a program of working with children who are affected by that displacement. What I just want to say very briefly here, because I know that Winnie's got a huge amount of experience around sort of settlement camps and refugees, is that what I really learned, what my real sort of takeaway over the last sort of 4 or 5 years working in this environment is about the need to understand the complexity of a problem. And I actually sort of felt at the time, almost quite naively, that, if you look at the logo in terms of UNHCR, it is a shelter, it is hands, it is a family. And for me, that what that should actually signify, what should symbolize is safety, is refuge. But actually what really struck me is that so much of the conflict or the challenges or the complexity of what people had left has simply just changed postcode, and now it's within this footprint here. And that really got me to understand about, what is the problem that we're trying to solve? What are the components of it? And also what I realized is that if we looked and we compared with change management, at some point we get what we say is that we freeze, we change, we unfreeze. That doesn't happen in these environments. So if a woman is moving, whether she is fleeing natural disaster, whether she's fleeing humanitarian, conflict, economic sort of situation, then actually nothing changes for her because we don't support them in making that change. So at the arrival, when you either cross a border into a country, whether you come into a camp, we don't actually stop and say, this is the new normality. So in terms of violence and exploitation, no longer acceptable. And so this was the real sort of challenge for me, is that too easily and too often that people like me, whether as a senior police officer or whether as an international advisor, we go in and we say, here's the solution. And we really don't understand that, what are the drivers around this? And when we look at somewhere like Kakuma, there's about 14 different nationalities, and on average, and this was certainly before the Trump administration, that people were resident there for around about 15 years. And of course, the changes that he made in terms of migration policy significantly changed that for people. So I just wanted to touch on that first of all, and that was real sort of a start of a whole new journey for me. The picture here, this is not refugees. These are people. These are residents of a community, a pastoralist community in Kenya, up in the northern part in the county of Marsabit, and not far from the border with Ethiopia. And so I talk again here about understanding the complexity of the problem. So how do we understand the impact on women, girls, and youth? And let's not clump them together, because when I say the impact, I mean very separately and differently on those particular groups. And then, of course, we could talk about marginalized groups, LGBTQI groups as well. And how do social and cultural norms inform this problem? I've talked here about, I've made sort of several references to social and cultural norms. And again, I think that coming very much from a UK perspective is that we would go through sort of series of years of when something would change, there'd be a new group of maybe people coming into our communities, and that would encourage us to actually sort of learn or to look or to listen. But what we need to understand is, how do those norms determine the status of women? And I'm a great believer that the status of women within the community determines the status of women within the policing services. And that's so often a challenge for us. I reference here the value of girls. Those are not my words. These are the words of girls within these communities. So often you hear them talk about, I am simply property. And that is about the fact that girls when they go for marriage, that there is an exchange of a dowry. That dowry has some value to it, whether that is livestock, whether it's property, whether it's money. And so girls actually see themselves as property. So what is the value of girls? What are the traditional roles and practices? And that's not just around early child marriage or FGM, but it's also around this preference over boys and girls and who has the opportunity of going to school. That is, of course, relevant when we're talking about conflict, because what we would understand is that a girl, a woman who is educated, who understands about making decisions, about critical thinking, is much better placed to be able to inform solutions around conflict. And where do threat and risks lie? Because so often we talk about the actual, if you like, the aggressor themselves, but actually some of those threats and the risks lie within those communities as well. And then critically, what I've learned is, how does our response exacerbate those problems? From a UN perspective, we talk about do no harm. And this is really, really important, because the changes that you might seek to make today potentially could actually make so many of these people even more vulnerable. So how does climate change impact the role of women within communities? Well, actually, if we look at these women here, and they are from the Samburu community within Marsabit County. So very much they are the ones that are responsible for fetching water, for fetching firewood. They're responsible for generating income to provide food for their families, to pay for school fees for children, but also to be able to provide that provisions for food. And there's some really interesting sort of norms. So the husband will own the livestock, but actually the women own the milk, the produce that comes from that livestock. Now she can do whatever she wants with that milk or that produce. She can give it away. She can sell it. And so she has to find different ways in which to do it. So there's very clear within these communities, there's very clear rules about what are the norms. And so we have to understand those as well. And I can certainly say that when we talk about climate change in these communities, and right now they're experiencing severe drought, is that the burden is even greater upon these women. So are they more vulnerable? There's been studies that's actually looked at, does human trafficking, does it increase during drought or during pandemic? And the evidence suggests that there are greater risks in terms of that. And certainly, again, I can comment that as families become more in need of resource, about livestock to be able to sell to generate income, then actually girls are at greater risk in terms of early child marriage. And if a girl is going to be prepared for marriage, she's going to be cut. And so you can start to see all of these cause and effect around different factors that determine the lives of these women. But also, again, what's interesting is around women. Are they enablers or facilitators? And again, what I've learned very much from within this community is there's lots of singing. You can see the beautiful sort of beads and the dress of these women. And singing is very much a part of culture. But actually, the women will sing to the men. And in many occasions, the women are actually either inciting or motivating the men to actually go and to deal with the conflict. And often that is through conflict, particularly where there has been theft of livestock. So if we understand the true costs, and again, I'm not just talking about the pound or the dollar or the shilling, but actually here, and I spent I've spent many days with these communities, with women within this community. And back in 2016, I did my first little piece of work with them. And I was actually looking, we wanted to establish some programs of work with them. And we wanted to understand, what were the challenges and what did they look for? And actually what these women told me is that when it comes to droughts and when there is limited supply of water, and what you can see here is the person that's bent forward with a kind of the red hat on, that is a man. So other than the young boy standing on the edge of the wall there, then it is the man who is overseeing the supply of water. The women told me, we will send our most attractive daughter to go and fetch water. Why? Because it means that she can go to the front of the queue, because this man will determine who, how, and when they actually get water. What that often means as well is that girl is sexually exploited. And what the women actually say is, that's what I went through when I was a girl. So it has become a norm. And so we can start to see how, you know, simple events in life really can have devastating effects. And this is why, again, and I'm sure that Winnie will also sort of make reference to this, is that from a UN perspective, we always talk about how can we make some simple improvements that significantly enhances the safety of women and girls. Quite frankly, remove that man and put a woman in there. There may be some type of corruption, but in terms of the physical and the exploitative aspect of it, then that is likely to go. So again, look here, and we have climate change and conflict here. And what we can actually see here is that this is a place in the very sort of rural part. It's actually within Marsabit National Park. And this is a place called the Singing Wells. And the singing wells here and this livestock look in really good shape. And I have to tell you that this is certainly some weeks or months before the real insurge of drought. But actually what's happened here is that the men have actually dug out a tree, that they've created it as a water sort of trough for these animals. And the men literally stand in the well and they lift the water up in pails and they pour it in. And as they do that, they actually sing to the cows. So the whole thing is called the Singing Wells. And it's actually about sort of keeping the livestock sort of calm during this very difficult period. But of course, what we see with climate change is that people have to go further and further afield to access water, to access grazing. That is often either women, girls, or young boys that are taking that livestock, whether it is cows, whether it's goats and sheep. As they move further and further afield, and I am talking 5, 10, 15 kilometers at a time, that eventually they get to a point where they stay out for long, long periods of time without access to food, just to look after the livestock there. As they encroach into the land of other tribes, that's where the flashpoint is. That is where we start to get this real conflict. And this is where we'll either have theft of the livestock or people will lose their lives. So I just wanted to, just to share those few slides there, but really just to sort of come back to how do we then define in the work that we do, how can we define the role of women? First of all, we must realise that women are adversely affected by climate change and conflict. And I urge us to really not just say that, but to really analyse and understand in what way are they more adversely affected. We need to understand social and cultural norms, because those norms have been there for as long as these people will remember. They live, they die by those norms. So don't go in and see what I'm saying. I'm not saying change them, because that's not our role to do, and that is probably not possible for us to do. But we need to understand them. And that's why I say respect those norms when defining our approach and our solutions. Ensure women's access to decision making. And how do we do that? We equip them, we empower them, and we enable them. And that's the lessons that I continue to learn. And I find that is really what we need to really commit towards if we're going to be a sort of a positive part of solution and understand this problem. So that's from me. Thank you.
Thank you, Ellie, for sharing what's been a very interesting journey in terms of moving from UK policing into this new world. And And I'm sure we're going to continue to discussing all of that as we go on. Winnie, I'm going to come to you next, and hope you're okay, because I know you were thrown out, I think, and I hope you're back now and you're okay. Can you hear me? Winnie? Winnie, you're on mute. Winnie, you're on mute.
I'm sorry, Barbara, but I can't unmute her. I've asked her to unmute.
Yes, if you ask her to unmute, that would be helpful. We'll get there in just a moment. There's never an event where you don't have a few
I have to say, it's really annoying because we checked out the internet from Rwanda this morning and it worked perfectly. And now she's...
Right, okay, well, while we're waiting to sort out that, can I perhaps come back to you, Ellie? If you'd like to unmute. And you mentioned in your story of your journey, you mentioned, and something that was really dear to my heart is school. And I know every camp across the world is displacement camps and refugee camps. They're all very different, and the way they're managed and the standards that are able to be maintained in terms of people's livelihoods. But in terms of education, in your experience, to what extent are young people, boys and girls, they are able to attend, some form of education?
Yeah, Barbara, it's really interesting, and certainly from my experience in Kakuma refugee camp, is that actually education, in terms of sort of rules, is accessible to everybody. And of course, what we know is that within that particular region and so many of those sort of nationalities that come into the camp, they have a real passion for education. The Sudanese that you showed in the photographs, Sudanese, Kenyans, Congolese, they all have an absolute passion for education. And so that is available there. Some of the primary schools that I saw there's one in particular, and it accommodates in its education program 10,000 children. Ooh. It literally runs 2 shifts a day. Now, that for me was also very interesting, because in terms of how do you regulate the age of the child, of the person that's going into that environment, and how do you look at that from a child protection perspective? Where you get conflict is that is all available free of charge, and it's the Kenyan educational curriculum. For those people who are from what we call the host community, they would go through challenges, particularly financial, to be able to access that same education. I see that Winnie's back, so I'm sure that Juliet will want to try and make it.
Winnie, can you hear me? You're on mute. No, that's very interesting. Thank you, Ellie, in terms, because education is so important in terms of, I appreciate, and people are spending a long time, they're, big proportion of their lives living in the camps. And we don't know. I mean, from 15 years is a long time, an average of 15 years is a long time.
Sure, and certainly from a community perspective, like I've shown you with the pictures from Harare, unfortunately, we still have a situation where there is that sort of competition between boys and girls in terms of who can access or who can access first in terms of education. But again, what we see that it's incredibly important if we're going to tackle sort of issues around conflict.
Yes, no, it is absolutely, it's incredibly important. And also to say is that some of the camps around the world, they're not positioned close to amenities and communities where you can go and access schools. Some of them are a long way away from schools and any other form of engagement with the local community. So it is very difficult. Juliet, I think we're still. Winnie, can you hear me?
No, I think she's got such poor internet. Anyway, Caroline's raised her hand. Oh,
Okay.
and Winnie's raised her hand, but I'm not sure.
It was just to ask Ellie something, if I may, around the impact or the particular vulnerability of female heads of households in camps. I'm thinking of widowed, but also perhaps wives of soldiers who've been in the conflict, and also about the extent to which women might get involved in internal conflicts within camps.
Yeah, and Caroline, I think that, you know, I'm going to be absolutely honest and say that, you know, the first time that I went into the camp, I sort of think back now that maybe I was sort of, maybe I was almost sort of naive, really. But from one perspective, I would say that what's also important to realise is that you could have a husband will send, maybe he has 2 or 3 wives, he will send his youngest wife with all of his children to flee, whether that's conflict or climate sort of change or problems. And so she will travel with all of those children into the camp. And so some of those children are almost the same age as her. Mm. If you then fast forward, let's say over sort of 8, 9, 10 years, and there is an opportunity from a government like the UK or the United States or Australia, and we offer resettlement. The way that it works is that they take the DNA of that family unit, and you can only be resettled if we can actually show that lineage in terms of association. So immediately, if she is with the children of other women, the DNA profile will not meet the criteria, and therefore they will never be available. It will never be available to them to be resettled. What we also should think about is when we talk about repatriation, then actually when she goes back, what does she go back to? Because we know that so many of these women become widows, and yet she has no entitlement to ownership of land. She has no entitlement of inheritance, and sometimes is going back to a greater conflict, and that is now being taken as the wife by a brother of her husband. So whether she goes this way or that way, the impact is greater.
Thank you for your
Hello.
question, Carolyn. Hi, Winnie. We've got Winnie back. So hi, thank you. Let's move on now and start and talk to Winnie. And what I'd like to do is, or to ask you, is that what made you decide to become a police peacekeeper, and what motivated you? You know, what motivated you to take on this important role?
Thank you, Barbara. I'm so sorry for the connection.
Do not worry. You are here now.
Yeah, I'm here now. What motivated me to go for peacekeeping in South Sudan? UN police officers is authorized by United Nations Security Council to serve in peacekeeping. So for someone to be allowed to go for peacekeeping, normally must be part of his or her country's either police or military or correction services. So by then, I was a serving police officer. Then I was seconded, and I was willing to serve. The motivation, I was motivated by, first of all, I'm a person who likes to serve people, especially when it comes to needy people or people in need. The motivation to protect people who are vulnerable. That's how it helped me so much and drive my passion and encouraged me to see how vulnerable people could smile just because of my presence or my protection. Secondly, I was motivated by collaborating with other people. The United Nations peacekeeping mission is a component composed of civilians, military, correction services, civilian police, and FPUs, or formed police units. So when you collaborate with all those people coming from different backgrounds, from different cultures, from different experiences, you learn more from each other. Another thing that motivated me to go for peacekeeping was culture diversity. Like I can give an example. In Rwanda, we just speak one language. We are all Rwandans. We don't have different tribes that speak different languages. So working with different people from different backgrounds and different cultures, I enjoyed it so much, and I learned different cultures. I learned different cuisine from different people. And as a person whose country has just come from genocide atrocities, this helped me so much to learn from others who, like if I can say, like in Tanzania, in UK, in Australia, in Sweden, where they has never, maybe like 70 years without war. So we could learn from each other, and professionally, culturally, work-wise, everyone could learn from each other.
Thank you, Winnie.
I was also motivated by to take a responsibility internationally, since Rwanda is an active country, a contributing country internationally to the community. There was if I may say, a feeling that the genocide happened because of not international community to intervene. So I felt like if I could intervene and protect these civilians who are not participating in war crimes, maybe my effort, my contribution could do something to those people who are in danger. Thank you.
Thank you, Winnie. Yes, incredibly. Well, I can understand your motivation and your passion just in terms of when you speak about it, but also that the point you make about working collaboratively and seeing people as a whole, rather than having, you know, people dealt with in different situations, you know, by different services and so on, bringing it all together and seeing a person as a whole and recognizing what their needs are and wanting to, you know, in terms of protecting them. So that's so thank you for that. That's really important. And can we just go on now and perhaps just take a little look in terms of what your observations were working in the camps, in terms of what was life like in the camps for people?
Life in camps was not easy. It was just a heartbreaking one. Like, for example, in where I was in Western Victoria State. So I used to visit a refugee, an IDP camp called Tambula. It is in Western Victoria State, but it's so far from the city of Yambio. Very far, like more than 30 kilometers to that IDP camp. So going there was not simple. We could organize because the situation was so hostile by then. So we could go escorted by Bangladesh soldiers. We go with UNMISS, works in partnership with UNICEF, with World Vision, so that we go in a team. Because for us, like peacekeepers, what we normally do, it's protection for those ones who are FPUs. They protect, deter, and prevent a conflict. But for the civilian police or individual personal police, for them, what they do, they investigate where there is violation of human rights, reporting, and supporting the implementation of the UN mandate. So normally, because of these people who are in IDPs, they are really, I don't know how I can say, their lives is heartbreaking. You get there when you don't have anything. What they just tell you is, what have you brought? We are hungry. So that's why we could go in a team, so that if they could see people from World Food Program, they pretend these are the ones who at least give us food. Life in IDP camps affects people differently, because it normally bases on the life they were living when they were outside. Let's say if the women had their cultural norms of submissiveness, women can't talk when men are here, women don't do this, men does this. When it comes to the life of IDP of the camps, it becomes so difficult, to the extent that these people who are protecting these women and girls are no longer there. So you find that, like in camps where there is no near FPUs or soldiers to protect the camp, women fear to go outside to fetch water, to check for firewood, and you find really life is so hard for them. And it's also life in IDPs treats people differently, like disabled people or old people. You find also they are the people who need help first. At least for the women who has young boys and girls, they can go there outside and work for money, because most of the time they even refuse to go to school. We can't go to school when we are hungry. But for those ones who are old people, disabled people, you find the effect of IDP, the life of IDP camps treats people differently according to the status they were before, back to their homes.
So the children were able to go to school?
Most of them, they could go to school, but they could go like on Monday, Tuesday, they don't go there, Thursday, like in a week, they attend like 2 days or 3 days. When you ask why don't you go to school, because they had built a school near the camp, but they couldn't, they were just going out to look for money, working for money so that they can get something to feed the family.
Okay, and in terms of you were involved in child protection in your work as a peacekeeper. Do you, in your opinion, do you feel that those child protection services went far enough to protect the children? And those protection services, were they different for boys and girls?
Not really, because whenever there is conflict, of course, the effect is different from boys and girls, because if even in those IDP camps, you could find that girls are protected from going outside, because they assume they can, of course, be left, but boys could move anyhow, because there were some intruders coming from outside. They could be inside the camp and hear the sound of gunfire. So the few men that were there and boys were the ones who are allowed at least to move out of the camps. So you find that the protection of the child in IDP camps is not really working, because it works, but not really. Because if you leave the boy child to go out and leave the girl child, yet they are all children. What we could do as the civilian police, we could observe and report the incidents that we could see. Another thing that we could work for the children, it's advocating for them, for most of those ones who we could find them in detention centers, but not in IDPs. In normal life, we could work with local police, we could work with local courts to advocate for children. So I think there's something that children should be more helped, if I may say. Normally, you find that life was not easy, but when again comes to the life of the camps, it deteriorates. You find that now they are not putting the education, like education, on top of everything, because all the side effects that comes depends on the status of people we are living in. If women could have been educated, and those girls, at least they could find some way out. But yes, you find there are those people who are not educated. There are those people who still enshrin their life in cultural norms. But at least when they see some women in participating in the peacekeeping and peace negotiations and peace advocacy, so at least it could inspire them. So
yes, no, yes. Sorry, carry on.
And the mainstreaming child protection in the United Nations is in all missions, as they are written, they are good, but the implementation, you find the implementation is a bit tight.
Yes.
You just monitor and report. You just monitor and report. So you don't. There is no quick action of what a peacekeeper can do when he or she's on the ground.
Yes, no, it's as you say, we often find we have all the things written down and they're beautifully written down, but implementation at the end of the day is what matters, and that often is lets us down very badly and lets people down very badly in terms of how we do that. Okay, can I move on now, Winnie, in terms of going back to Ellie for one quick question, and then I'll come back to you again, Winnie. Ellie, can I just ask you very quickly, in your experience, in terms of the work that you've done, do you believe that there are many women working in security, or should there be more? Is there enough?
I think that's a really, really interesting question. So I think that my perception, certainly when I look at sort of networking, if you look at even the profile of people that are here today, then there is a good representation of women. I think the question is, are they in the right positions of influence? And let me sort of jump back to kind of sort of Winnie's environment, which was very much around sort of UN police and UN peacekeeping. And I can remember some years ago, in fact, it was following a CSW conference when I actually attended in person. And I spoke with a senior representative within UN police. And what I sort of asked is that, what can we do to really enhance the representation of women, but in the right position? So in the position where that they could, if you like, sort of define the approach, they could really sort of influence sort of strategy, etc., etc. And the problem is that it's a very sort of hierarchical sort of system. And unless you have significant experience in missions, you are never going to get to those senior ranks. And so actually what you also find is that when you go into mission, you've got people that have got great career histories, but it's all of mission experience. And so what we actually suggested is that if you had a sort of flatter structure, and that you were able to, understand again, before we define a policing response or before we go in for mission, if we actually understand what are the issues we've got to deal with, and as Winnie has said, it is about issues for women, it is about issues for children and young people, then the chances are that you have lots of female officers that would be able to perform those roles. So they can get that experience, and then that gives them that experience to move up within the ladder. But unfortunately, the response is that we literally take off the shelf, this is the response, this is the model that we deploy, and so that in itself is going to be a real obstacle. So I think there's a huge number of women who are really passionate, are educated, are qualified around all of this. There's a lot of us that have got some real sort of diverse and sort of amazing experience in the field, but are we given the opportunities to really be in those influential posts? I would say not sufficient.
Right, I think I would tend to agree with you there in terms of finding the opportunities for women to be able to move into leadership where you can then really start to influence. And at the moment, if those doors don't open to let you in, then you can't get into the leadership roles where you're in a position to be able to influence. Okay, so thank you for that, Ellie. I'm now going to come back to Winnie, and we're going to move on. And what I want to know, in your opinion, Winnie, do you think climate change is having an impact on people's lives, forcing them to move to find a better life? And how can we actually plan better for the people who are forced to move in terms of being able to accommodate their needs wherever it is that they may find themselves in terms of their journey?
Yeah, I agree with you that climate change has been recognized as a major insecurity human issue. When there is drought, let's say, for example, when there is drought and the whole place is flooded, people migrate from one place to another. But the problem is who does what and when. Majority of people, at least who be having information, you find that also, as I had said, the migration of people due to climate change affects people differently, because women tend to be having less information on each and every situation going around. So you find that even the climate change itself is affecting women and children more than men it does. So in my view, I feel that women should participate in all programs and policies and planning regarding to climate change, so that if they are aware, then they can plan accordingly so that it does not affect people differently. Although we can't say that it can't affect people. When there is climate change, of course it affects people, but at least collateral, not differently. The way it affects boys is not the way it affects girls. I think women's unequal participation in normal life, in political decision making, ownership of land, access to finance, that makes them so being affected than their male counterparts. So empowering women in mainstreaming gender in all aspects of climate change, that could actually help to reduce the impact of climate change on women and girls.
Thank you, Winnie. That's a very interesting response in terms of, actually, it's a big issue in terms of women's ownership and rights to land, and in terms of being able to cultivate that land and produce an income. But at the same time, until you enable women to do that, they don't have the collateral to be able to go and get the finance to build their businesses, in terms of making an income. So in terms of that scenario, I think there's a big change that we need to make in terms of recognizing that, yes, at the end of the day, men, boys, and women and girls, we're all different. It impacts us all in different ways. But if you're going to give us an opportunity to be able to rebuild our lives, then we've got to actually address the issues of land ownership and access to finance. So So they are two very important issues. Okay, so just one last question to you, Winnie, and that is in terms of what more needs to be. We've talked about the issues that women and girls face in the displacement, the refugee camps, and life is very hard. It's it's not easy. But what more can be done to improve the security for women and girls, both on that migration journey and life in the camp, in terms of improving their well-being and time spent in those places? What more can we do to improve their security?
Women in IDP camps, or women in climate change affected areas need to be.
Yes, the climate change affected areas, if they're forced to move from one area to another because of the climate change or because of a natural disaster or a conflict, but people are forced to move to new areas to build their lives again, and at the same time on that journey they're exposed to risks in terms of their personal security and well-being, and then they get to the camps, and as you said earlier, in the camps, women and girls are also are vulnerable and exposed to risks, and we know that there's sexual violence and rape happens in those camps. So I'm just basically wondering what more we need to do, what more can we do to improve their security? And I suppose, at the end of the day, would more peacekeepers make a difference?
Yeah, for my opinion, I think before, as we had seen that the climate change and women and girls who are in IDP camps are affected differently from their male and boy counterparts. We should encourage the research on gender disaggregated data so that whatever conclusions will come across should not be just based on monitoring and reporting. Research on gender disaggregated data. How are boys being treated? How are girls being treated? How are women being treated? And improving their security can depend on the outcome we've got from what you have been researching on, because there is this just perspective of assuming that women are weak, women are affected, but how? So improving the women need physical security, first of all, though women can do everything, but physically they are weaker than their male counterparts. So in a war affected area, in a climate change affected area, where there is no security for women, there is no security at all. Security should be for all people. Security should be for weak and strong people. So I feel in peacekeeping missions, the protection of IDP camps, IDPs should not just base on the protection of the outside sites, pure protection of civilian camps outside, but also inside, and know what is going on, because these, apart from being attacked from an outsiders, they are those effects that are within their families. For example, when we went to Tambura IDP camp, many women were frustrated by just being left by their husbands, which you can't know when you are just standing outside, feeling you are preventing intruders from entering the sites. But when you go inside and talk to women, you find they have different insecurity issues at different points.
So I suppose in that sense, there's a very strong argument that, that in terms of the security within the camps, that we need to set up an infrastructure that enables the people within the camps to be part of that security process, in terms of actually being able to let people know what goes on in the camp, on what they need to be protected from, in terms of, you know, as you say, more research needs to be done in terms of understanding what the issues are. So that's, you know, yeah, we really need to lobby hard and campaign hard to get people to do that research, because I think there's a real urgent need there in terms of people's protection and well-being. Okay, thank you, Winnie. I'll leave it there. And now we're going to go back to Ellie for the last question. And I'm conscious that now time is moving on a little bit. So if we can aim to spend about 5 minutes on the next question, and then we'll open it up to the audience. Okay, so in terms of since you've moved on from the police and you've taken on this whole new chapter in your life, which in itself has brought you unique insights into the lives of women affected by climate change. Can you share some of those insights with us in terms of climate change and the impact it's has had and having on women, and how they've responded to it? Because I know lots of women have risen up and responded to the challenge with a huge amount of courage.
Yeah, and I think maybe this is an opportunity also just to share that those photographs and the insights around the village of Karare is actually also my home. So post-retirement, I married a Kenyan who is from the Samburu tribe, which is a pastoralist community. And so actually I'm very much a part of that community with my own family and connections there, which gives me the most incredible insight. And I have to reassure you that the marriage came first before the insights. But what I have seen is that you know, really understanding and having this insight in terms of social and cultural norms, traditional practice, how things differ for adult men and women, and then for boys and girls. And really being able to see that if we were to do almost a timeline, and again, I think this is a fabulous piece of research that should be done, is that we almost did a timeline and we said, you know, what does normality look like? Well, it will be sort of mother at home within the confines of the manyatta, looking after children, looking after the small livestock, and the general safety and security of that sort of physical piece of land. And, you know, a young brother will be out looking after maybe goats and sheep, maybe a couple of kilometers away. And then other children will be at school. During the course of the day, then their mother would go out to fetch water, she would go out to fetch firewood. But if, as we turn through the pages of the diary or the calendar, actually as we started to get drought, then that situation would change. And then what we would see is that the woman, the mother, has to go further afield to be able to fetch water, which means that she leaves home exposed for longer. It would also mean that at school, because the government haven't provided the foodstuffs and don't provide water, you can't cook maize, rice and beans without water, then children will drop out of school, because a real incentive of going to school is I get food. It's also a real incentive for parents to send children to school because they get food. So when that stops, then the children will drop out of school. What they will also do is the mother will take maybe the eldest daughter to come and take over those roles within the home and with the manyatta. So again, whether that's about looking after young children or even sort of elderly because of the way that the family is actually set up, and looking after that small livestock, but security within that sort of that small manyatta. The young boys who have been tasked with looking after sort of the herds, whether it's of goats and sheep or whether it's of livestock, will now have moved 5, 10, 15, 20 kilometers away. And they'll get to a point as to when they will stay there overnight, and they could be away from home. I have daily contact with my family in the community, and they're experiencing drought again right now. And, you know, members of the family are away from home for weeks at a time, and they rely on somebody maybe once a week carrying food, and that's not enough food to last for the week. When they then start to move to graze and access water, they come into somebody else's terrain. Where that is a tribal conflict, a tribal conflict, then actually there will be fighting, people will be killed, livestock will be stolen. And so, you know, this is, if you actually just sort of, if you were just to look at a calendar and to say on this date, what does kind of normality look like? If we were to actually monitor rainfall and the difference in terms of temperatures, you know, for a long period of time now, the temperatures there are in the high 30s, early 40s, low 40s, and that is consistent. There is no break at all. And then what you also learn in the African community, and I'm sure Winnie will relate to this, rain is a blessing. You know, rain has come from the heavens, it's come from God, it is a blessing. And yet when that rain falls, we then see that we've got flooding. But also what you see is the livestock cannot cope. I have never ever been in a situation, and I was home 5 weeks ago, where I sort of joked and said, as a police officer, I have picked up many drunken people from the road. But when I was home, I helped my family lift fully grown cows back onto their legs. They are so weak that they are literally collapsed on the ground. They do not have the strength to get back up on their 4 feet. That is the impact of what's happening. And let me just finally say, just picking up on the question you asked, Winnie, there was a UK politician many years ago that said, we're going to get tough on crime and the causes of crime. We have to get tough on the causes of conflict. Because when these women go into the camp, they do not do so by making an informed decision. We do not facilitate that decision-making for them. And actually, if we looked at the cost, not just the financial cost, the cost of responding to conflict costs more than if we were to address the causes of conflict. And what my dream would be is that these women would never, ever leave their homes. They would have the strength, they would have the resilience, they would have the support to be able to stay. Thank you.
Thank you, Ellie. They're my sentiments entirely. Yes, we've got to get to the bottom of the root causes and be able to address those root causes and hopefully get to a point where nobody actually has to leave their homes, and that you can find different ways of living by staying where in your home in terms of moving on. So that's really interesting, and thank you for so much for sharing your journeys with us. I have learned so much, and I have so many questions buzzing around in my head. But before I ask my questions, I'm going to ask the floor. Does anybody have any questions for Ellie or Winnie, please? Ronald.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm having trouble with the chat, so I'll just ask my question.
Yes, please put your hand up if you want to. You don't have to worry about writing it in the chat.
And this may sound like it's going in a different direction, but Ellie, could you inform us what is the current status of the camps in Kenya? I know there's periodic attempts to close them down, etc. And quite frankly, I work with another NGO that has an ongoing school project in Kakuma, if I'm pronouncing that correctly.
Yeah, you are. Yeah.
But we're sort of stuck with why continue with this if the camps are going to be closed down? Is it realistic that they're closing the camps down? What's happening? Are people moving out? Are they being forced out?
A really interesting question. So actually so in Kenya we have 2 camps. We have the Dab, which is the largest, and that predominantly is Somali. And we have Kakuma, which, as I said, has this much greater representation. The Kenyan government some years ago said that they were going to close down the Dab. And that was, they said that some of the Al-Shabaab attacks within Kenya had actually been orchestrated within the Dab camp. So they went through a program of, and there was lots of negotiations through with United Nations in terms of what was the moral and the legal duty of the Kenyan government. And of course, none of us are surprised that there's clearly also a huge financial sort of link there as well. But lots of people were repatriated back to Somalia, but the camp is still there. Probably about 12 months ago, the Kenyan government then announced that actually it was closing Kakuma. And again, real concerns there, because in terms of, and I advise an NGO also working in the camp. And so we've had this same conversation about, well, are we going to be able to continue to access funds? Are we going to continue to do activities? And, it's a very difficult, it's a very difficult question. But at the moment, both camps are still functioning. And I think what you'll find is that there will be sort of a financial settlement between the United Nations and the Kenyan government in terms of what they continue to provide. But it is that is the situation at the moment, Ronald.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, that was sort of my assumption that there was negotiations going on. That anyway, thank you very much for that.
Does anyone else have a burning question? Juliet.
Yeah. Hi, I just wanted to ask Winnie. I thought it was fascinating that Winnie was talking about the peacekeepers being on the outside of the camp, and that there was so much sort of happening inside the camp, and they were having no effect on that because they were kept outside and were stopping outsiders from going into the camp. And that I just thought that was a really interesting thing. But also, how do you think that can be resolved, Winnie? Do you think because it's these camps, some of them are quite large, and some of them are, most of we just heard from Ellie, are very permanent rather than temporary, that there should be a sort of almost a police service set up within the camps?
What I was thinking, my view was that the protection of civilians outside the camp is good, but again, coming down to their issues is so crucial, because there is this outside security, but there is also this inside insecurity for both men and women, boys and girls. So for the IDPs, they can see women serving in peacekeeping and feel that they are okay, they are role models there, but that one comes when they are a bit relieved. It can't just come when you're still hurting. So I was saying that the more effort should be put to get there inside the camp, understand them, though it doesn't deter the outside protection, because these people who are outside are FPUs, formed police units. They don't, for them, it's just keeping security for the IDPs, but outside the camps. But you find the interaction of these IDPs inside the camp is, especially when the camp is a bit far or in an insecure place, you find that people, the UN personnel don't want to go there.
And
yes,
can I ask, thank you, Winnie.
I don't know whether, Ellie, did you want to come in there? I just saw you.
Yeah, I just wanted to raise a point, actually, and I don't necessarily know the answer to the question, that the camp, we have to consider who has jurisdiction. Because certainly for Kakuma and for the DAB, the jurisdiction is the Kenyan government. So in terms of who has the authority to police within the camp. And that's where it's unfortunate that it's not always as easy. Sorry, Winnie.
Yeah, peacekeepers are not allowed into the camps a lot of times.
Yeah, Winnie, did you want to come back on that?
Yes, please. I'm saying that there are those IDP camps that they are in control of the government, but they are these ones again who are in control of the UN, where there is still too much hostilities. So for those ones who are still in the hands of the United Nations, those are the ones I was speaking about. But for those ones who are in the hands of the government, apart from monitoring and reporting and enforcing the mandate to be the reporting the violation of international humanitarian laws. There's nothing you can do much.
Following up on that, do you feel from your experience that there is a need for and I don't mean just training in terms of going on a one-day course kind of thing, but do you feel that there's a need for a better training program, an ongoing training program and dialogue for the people that are actually providing the security in the camps, so they understand the people that they're protecting and the needs of those people that they're protecting better? And if there are issues that need to be confronted, they've got the wherewithal to know how to deal with those issues.
Sure. There should be much more training to those people who are protecting, either those ones who are getting inside the camp and those ones who are outside the camp.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Caroline.
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank you both so much for coming and talking with us today. It's been fascinating. But I wonder, both of you are actually in a minority, in that there's only something like, is it 15% of women making up either the policing force, the policing forces, or the peacekeepers. And I wonder how you feel about that yourselves. Have you ever experienced any discrimination in terms of being in that minority, or the reverse? Or have you ever felt that the people in the camps treat you differently as women, rather than the more obvious, most of them they're more used to having men around? I wonder what has been your own personal experience of that.
Who would like to go first?
I'll let
Ellie?
Winnie go first.
Okay,
I'll let Winnie go
would
first.
you like to?
I didn't get the question clearly.
You didn't get the question?
Yeah.
Do you want to,
Shall I-
Caroline, do you want to?
Okay, sorry, Winnie. I was just saying, in your own personal experience, as a minority, there only being a small number of women, both in the policing of, in the international policing and the peacekeepers, have you ever experienced either any discrimination against yourself as being in that minority, or what has been your personal experience as being in a minority role?
As a peacekeeper.
Yes, as a peacekeeper.
Yeah, I understand. Actually, there's nothing like discrimination. But again, when you find that you are in a role-dominated men, you don't feel safe, because there is a tendency of UN deploying women in the cities and deploying men in rural areas. So you find that those women, like 1 or 2 who are deployed with men, you find, of course, you are minority. You find you're not comfortable with the people you're working with, because you are few. You don't have someone to talk to when you want to go, like, to the prison to interview the prisons. You find the person you are going with is a male person. So you can't go into the correction service and interview the whole of the inmates. You find that what you are doing is not enough compared to what men are doing. They are more, and they are deployed widely than women does.
Okay, thank you, Winnie. Ellie, do you want to add anything to that?
I mean, just to say that from a personal perspective, I sort of think I reflect back on the challenges that I faced when I was serving in the UK, in terms of sort of, having that that presence and that authority. And unfortunately, I find it very much in this environment as well. And one thing that I have learned over the last few years is finding a way, particularly, working in the likes of whether it's in Kenya, or whether it's in Somalia, or here in Palestine, but it's actually about you've got to sort of develop a whole presence, and you've got to almost sort of justify or legitimize your sort of presence. It's no longer just introduce and this is who I am. You've got to almost present your credentials before these people will will engage. So yeah, that's the extent.
Yes, no, you're absolutely right. We've got to work. We have to work an awful lot harder at establishing our credibility, and that we're somebody that that's worth talking to. And it takes a while to do that. And I'm not in the police or security services, but I've certainly experienced that in terms of my career. You really do need to make your voice heard. So
can I, Barbara? Can I just ask Ellie to expand on that? Do you think things are getting better, or do you think we're going backwards in terms of actually acceptance of women? And Winnie can answer that as well.
Yeah. I can give an example of Rwanda. Things are getting better than they were, because up to now, like in Rwanda National Police, women comprise of 10%, and the Rwanda National Police was established in 2000. So at least you can feel that there is a bit of improvement so fast, so quickly.
And I would just say, I mean, it's fantastic to hear in terms of representation, but of course, what I would always say, having come from those senior positions, is actually about this positions of influence. And just, as an example, I can remember that, the Metropolitan Police a couple of years ago sort of talked about an incentive which was about a whole cohort of officers from the Black and ethnic minority communities, and everybody was celebrating. And I just sort of despaired, because it's like they're going to become so frustrated because the whole culture and the rank structure is going to mean there's a huge number of them, which is fantastic. But are they going to be able to influence? No. So
it's not about numbers.
I think no. And Julia, I think that in a way, I think I'm not going to say that things have got worse, but the challenge is great.
Yes, I think you're right. I think the challenges have become greater, and I think we are in a better place than we are when we were, but we've got a long way still to go. And I think we all want for that handle to turn faster. We want to be in the sports car getting there rather than on the tractor kind of thing. So we want the pace to be to accelerate the pace for change. And can I know we're coming very, very close to the end, but I just want to throw in one tiny little question that I'd be interested to know. And I remember some time back, and I know Price Waterhouse, the consultancy, international consultancy, they've been doing some work with the UN, but we know in the camps that there's, people are displaced, but when they're displaced, they also have huge skill sets. They have huge knowledge. They are, they are trained to do various things. And some of them might be doctors and nurses and so on. And you find yourself in a camp and suddenly there's nothing. And we all need a structure in our lives. And part of that structure is, if you like, our daily work routines. And we also need to earn money to put food on the table. And we talked about that earlier. Have you come across any, in your experience, have you come across any schemes or initiatives in the camps where people are helping the displaced people who find themselves in the camps and have lost their work, their jobs and so on, to be able to retrain and to be able to actually start working, because they're going to spend 15 years of their lives plus in these camps. So they really need to have some, normality in terms of the culture and the norms and the way we do things. So have you come across any schemes or initiatives where people are being trained to actually work and earn money and live a normal life in the camps?
If I very sort of quickly share my sort of experiences, that we rely on, or the camps rely on, NGOs and other investors to actually bring such programs in. But of course, let me just remind us in terms of the status of those people within the camps. They are refugees, they are living within a foreign country, they do not have the rights for work.
Yeah, that's a big problem.
But if they're displaced people in their own country, then they have the right to work. And if you are in the camp and you're able to become a refugee rather than an asylum, you change the status, then yes, you could work in those camps as well. Because I know Price Waterhouse is doing a huge amount in the Middle East in camps there. Sorry, Winnie.
Yeah, I just wanted to say something on the refugees who are here in Rwanda, who has just come from Afghanistan. 2 ladies just got employed in University of Rwanda. They are now lecturers, hence they are refugees. So I think those ones who are capable of working, they get jobs and work.
They do.
Yeah, they do.
That's good to hear, because I do think we need to be thinking about, you know, normal lives in terms of our expectations, the all the things that we do in our daily lives to survive. I think that's very much part of the life that we need to build for the people that are displaced and living in those environments for the moment until they can move on to a new environment. Ronald.
Barbara, just quickly, one example of where we've done that is in Kakuma and other camps as well, where within the education system, we have a lot of people who were former teachers or have those skills. So there is a program in Kenya, and I'm sure in other countries as well, where there's like a series of short courses or a way of certifying people so that they can be teachers within the camp.
Yes.
But I think it was Ellie that made the point that a lot of these people they do not have the right or legally to move out of the camp and find jobs. That it's a dilemma. So what happens is the children get sent out of literally get sent out of the camps, same kind of thing. They get sent out of the camps to try to scrounge some kind of money locally. That happens as well. So, but anyway, yes, there's a surprising amount of knowledge and skills within those camps, but people just get shut down because they can't use it. So that's one of the big problems that we have in UNHCR is how are you going to handle that? But that involves negotiations with the local governments, with the countries and so on, to allow people to have the paperwork or the documents so that they can leave the camp, so that they can actually do some work. That's one of the big arguments for actually closing down the big camps and using a totally different approach, where you instead of putting people in camps, you try to integrate them more into society. They're still refugees and they're still getting support, but they're getting it differently. And I think that's
they're living in the urban environment rather than
right.
Which
and I think
we
that
should all be trying to get to.
That favors much more women and children if they're part of an ongoing society rather than part of a ghettoized camp. And these camps become that way anyway.
Yes,
so
no, thank you for that intervention, but no, thank you for that intervention, Ronald. That is so important, because we've really got to, you know, they're not going to go away overnight. So we've really got to rise to the challenge and start organizing life differently for people.
I spent 20 years as a UN peacekeeper, a lot of it right there in East Africa. And so I think the insights of Winnie and Ellie are very good here. Excellent. This has been a very good session.
Thank you. Okay, right. Well, we've come to the end of it now, sadly, and we've run over time as well. So thank you for indulging.
Joanna, you have to go, but thank you. Yes, we all have to go, I think. And I'd just like to say a huge thank you to our two speakers, Winnie and Ellie, and also to Barbara for her excellent chairing of the event. And thank you to everybody else, and thank you for the questions, and thank you for the involvement and all the comments. It was so appreciated, and it's been a very rich discussion. And I was just going to say, we're recording this and we're going to put it on our website, and it will also be on the SecurityWomen app as well, so you can go back and listen to bits of it again. Okay, so have a good evening, everyone.
Tell your friends to go onto the website and the app and find it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
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 Bye, everyone.